So Eugene, you recently turned 40, and you have noticed lately that weariness is something that you're having to battle with more now than when you were younger. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely. I'd say I've felt the older I've got, it's so much easier to become more pessimistic and cynical. I think there's something about getting older that the wear and tear of life kind of chips away at you. And it's not necessarily, a physical thing, but it's 100% a mental thing from the perspective of, what people say about you. At first, you don't really pay it much attention or pay it much mind. At first, you kind of just fly through it. And definitely, like I mentioned earlier, in my younger years, I didn't allow myself to even focus or pay any attention to it. But as you get older and as the intensity of the different things people say and what society says about you kind of increases, what the media consistently pushes forward as this is the way to go, or this is, this is the life that you want. Subconsciously, all of these things take a toll on you. And in those those quiet moments, you can have dark moments where you start to think about, maybe that is an option that, I probably should be following. And as a result of those things continually taking a toll on you, it's almost like weariness starts to happen. And I found that if I don't really have in place my coping mechanisms, then all of a sudden it starts to really get to me. And I've noticed with each new level of responsibility that I take on, each new level of getting involved in some other aspect of, the vision or goal that I have or a blueprint that I have for my life, now all of a sudden I need to find new coping mechanisms to step up to this new level of responsibility. Because what I used to do for the old level of responsibility is no longer working at this new level. And now previously, where I wasn't tired or I wasn't wary or didn't really start to worry about thoughts or get anxious about anything, now because I've got this new level of intensity, this new level of responsibility, I'm actually thinking about things differently, and I'm not maybe, like I say, coping in the same way. So I've got to go through this process of trying to find out what is this new level of normal. How am I going to move forward in this new position that I'm in? And too often what I find in my life is I finally kind of figure out how to kind of work my way through it, and then all of a sudden more things happen, or shall I say more responsibility comes, and I've got to very quickly readjust myself, very quickly try to stretch myself. I'm not in my comfort zone anymore, I'm in my kind of stretch zone. I'm like, right, okay, grappling for as much support as possible, which I think again is quite key to have the right people around you, because I think when you hear all the different things that society says or what people say, or people who don't necessarily know you very well, they give their opinion about your position. So whether I'm single, and why am I still single when that I'm in a position where I could easily be in a relationship, but they don't know my story and they don't know what's happening internally, they don't know my struggles, they don't know what I'm actually dealing with. So all of a sudden it seems like their opinion is right and center, and it should be. And look at everyone else in this age range, and look at society's telling us, by this age you should have this and this all in check. But because I'm not in that position, I then begin to think, oh wow, maybe they've got a point. But then I've got to remember why I'm doing what I'm doing, the path that I'm on, and the journey that I'm walking, and recognize that just because other people say things doesn't mean it is pertaining to mine. And I'm not saying don't take feedback, and I'm not saying don't listen to people, because I do that all the time. But I think I've learned more and more to assess what people say, hear that out, but then take on board what I find is useful, and not allow the things that I don't find work in my journey to actually wear me down, to tear me down, so that mentally I'm in a place where I can't cope with things. And if I'm in that position, I start to get anxious. And I completely understand when people turn around and say, I've contemplated suicide. I get it and I understand it, because I've been in that place where you're in the middle of complete darkness, because you're hearing so many things and you're not even having your own internal voice to speak positivity or life into what you're doing. So you're like, okay, it just would be easy if I gave up. But then in that position, I've recognized, I have to be around the right people. I've got to put in place the right habits. I've got to put in place, like I said, the right coping mechanisms, so that I actually can move through that dark time and actually be successful. And I like success. I like to win. What can I do? I've realized I'm actually weaker than I thought I was.
You're weak.
I've come to that realization. I thought I was superhuman at first. But I've come to that place where I've acknowledged that the success of anything I do is based on my standard. And my standard is based on my habits. So for me to be able to deliver, if these things aren't in place, so for example, if I don't work out, if I don't eat correctly, and this is for me, if I don't, spend time around people, if I don't have the conversations that I can speak and vent what's going on in my heart out, I find that things build up. And then all of a sudden, I'm weaker and less able to deal with any onslaught or barrage of comments or society's perspective about what I should be doing. So it's actually a consistent daily process. And in fact, I'd say as I've got older, it's actually, I have to be more intentional.
Right.
I've actually got to go in more. I've actually got to make sure I carve out time in my calendar to make sure that I'm mentally able or capable. Because if I don't, then just by default of doing nothing, you go down this slippery road step by step of slowly wearing down, and you don't notice it at first. It's so subtle. But for me, I have a certain turning point where I realize I know I need to go in and do something here, because it's the way I'll respond to someone where I'll be in a session and someone will say something, and usually I'm cool now, I let it slide, but there's that bite inside and I'm like, come back, and I'm a bit cattier and I'm a bit more sarcastic than usual, in the point that it really hurts and cuts someone, and then acting out a character, I'm like, okay, I need time away.
Exactly.
Exactly. And I feel for me, those are my markers of or stimuluses of, okay, I'm getting weary, I'm getting tired. I think it's really important to have the right people around you, and we all are susceptible to mental health, and we all are susceptible to the environments that we find ourselves. So to be able to stand up and go through it, I just think you've got to put in place the right habits, and which will raise your standards. And once your standards are raised, then it doesn't really matter what happens. You've got something that you can be integral towards and actually move forward. So
brilliant. Thank you very much, Eugene. Thank you.
Lovely. All be very overwhelming and quite anxious and stuff like that, and then if you allow it to, which I think I allowed it to in my life, was it can breed into sort of all areas, and then it just sort of makes you then not want to engage. And it can make you just want to be like, it's a lot easier just to shut yourself off, be on your own, isolate yourself. You don't really want to deal with that, you don't really want to sort of deal with people and stuff like that, and then you get into your own head.